Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another show, for a brand new show called Let's Talk Arsenal on the TGT channel, where basically each week, I suppose, I'll be joined by a guest to talk about a specific topic around the club, which is very obviously current focused, and trying to look ahead to some of maybe the issues that we've got and how we might solve those, some of the things which are improving and some of the things that maybe aren't going so well. And so in today's first episode, we're going to talk about something that's kind of come up in a conversation I had with lead judges last week that I wanted to touch on in a little bit more detail, being Arsenal's recruitment. To do so, I'm joined by Adam from the TFO show. How you doing, mate? Are you well?
I'm good. I'm very, very good. I'm ready to talk about Arsenal's recruitment or lack thereof.
Yeah, it's probably a nice way to sum it up. We're going to kind of go through some of the old stuff that we've witnessed. Because if we start off by thinking about, in a way, how Arsenal has been a club that previously, if you think around the late 90s, early 2000s, a club that was kind of ahead of the curve, in a way. Arsene Wenger came in and used a lot of stats to bring in some young foreign talent, and that kind of got us ahead of things. Yeah. But then it began to kind of, not necessarily dip, but other sides kind of caught up with us, and we never really moved on. Is that a fair way of summing things up, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. I think it is also having access to a talent pool that hadn't really been explored yet. I think we're kind of seeing the same thing with Wolves now, in that they have access to a wide range of talent in Portugal that others don't necessarily have the same access to. And when Arsene Wenger first came in, we had access to the French talent and the French market, and others, whilst they maybe had some, didn't have the same level of exclusivity that Arsenal did. So, yeah, I think that, and the way we, handled the scouting and that type of network, it kind of gave us a cutting edge that we've lost a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately it was also hampered by the fact that we moved from Highbury to the Emirates in a period where we thought we were doing that to compete. And at that exact same moment, Chelsea and Manchester City came along with millions and millions and millions and ultimately blew Arsenal out of the water, and lots of other clubs as well. And we didn't match that, whereas clubs like Manchester United and Liverpool did match those fees and did start to pay big money for big players. So if we get to kind of around where the end of the Arsene Wenger era, because that period under financial restriction, Arsenal did make some decent signings. Of course, we think back to like Santi Cazorla. I look at Olivier Giroud as a fairly decent signing with the amount of return that we got from him, and we've arguably not really got much better from his replacement in Alexandre Lacazette. So if we then kind of go into this period towards the end of the Arsene Wenger era, when we started to spend big money on players that ultimately didn't really cut it for us. And by those players, I'm talking about the likes of Granit Xhaka, the likes of Shkodran Mustafi, and these players. In fact, what I'll do is I'll read to you, because I did this with lead judges the other day, and it's quite interesting to scroll back through Arsenal's finances and see where we've spent money over, say, the last 7 years. So if we think back to when we actually signed Mesut Ozil, which was, of course, in 2013, that was kind of the big groundbreaking deal for Arsenal, that it looked like Arsenal were going to move into this kind of world of spending big money on big players that would transform us. And at the time, ultimately, that impact immediately it was quite a big impact, wasn't it? Because we won an FA Cup, and Ozil kind of put us again on that pedestal of we can win things again now. Yeah. The season afterwards, we spent nearly £40 million on Alexis Sanchez, which again, you would say is very good investment.
Huge signing.
Exactly, a massive signing. We also signed Callum Chambers alongside him. Now, he cost us £18 million, and that's a lot of money for Arsenal. I mean, it's higher than it would have been the new transfer record, as far as I'm aware, before Mesut Ozil. Like, you look at the players before that: Santi Cazorla, Arshavin, they were the guys. Jose Antonio Reyes, they were the kind of £15 to £16 million signings that were our records. So Callum Chambers coming in would have been a record Arsenal signing had we have not had. It's crazy, isn't it, to think about it in that way? So that signing, and I want to kind of pick up on that. Do you look at the Callum Chambers signing in principle as kind of a good idea that never really came to fruition?
That's a good, yes, I do. Let me be honest. I think I think back to Adam in, what was that, 2013 or 14?
14, yeah.
2014.
Yeah.
I would have said, you know what? Southampton have a good history of developing players, because that's where Gareth Bale came from. Oxlade-Chamberlain came from there as well. Walcott, it was less of a great signing, more of a meh signing. But either way, they had a decent track record, and Callum Chambers was hotly tipped at the time to go on and do really big things. There are people that now say that Callum Chambers needs to come back into Arsenal's back line and improve us. So I think it did make sense at the time. And even Luke Shaw, now that I'm thinking about it, was really great. But I think I just don't know what he is. And I think we suffered a bit from the fate of Phil Jones-ism, who looked like he was a centre back, but could also play right back, could also slot into midfield if he needed to. And I think Callum Chambers suffers from the same fate. He hasn't quite nailed down a starting position in one particular area, and I think that's kind of cost him a little bit. So whilst it did make sense at the time, and whilst it sort of made financial sense, because £18 million isn't that much money in footballing terms, I think that money might have been better spent with someone who we knew what we were getting from, and I don't think he gives us value for money, or hasn't. Yeah.
I think also it's about, like, you look at maybe that signing, and I take on board what you're saying about that. He was a young guy. He was really kind of highly tipped to be like a really good player, and he could play in multiple positions. But we kind of talked about the context around £18 million for Arsenal at that time. Yeah. And it was a lot of money. Now, if I read you who our defenders were in that period, we had Per Mertesacker, we had Gabriel, we had obviously Callum Chambers coming in. I'm looking for further ones. We had Laurent Koscielny. I'm going further down the list to try and find more. Nacho Morales, of course, playing left back. And Isaac Hayden is kind of a player that played kind of at centre back and then moved into midfielder later on in his career. So none of those players are kind of jumping out at you and saying they are the players that are going to solidify Arsenal defence. And ultimately, Arsenal did leak goals towards the end of Arsene Wenger's tenure at the club that cost us position higher up the league. So when I look at the context of £18 million on Callum Chambers, that could have been spent on a starting centre-back that was better than we already had. But again, we were kind of around that period of where Arsene Wenger was very loyal to the players in his squad and only kind of bought to either bring in a world-class player like an Alexis Sanchez or bring someone that was kind of a vision for the future and not really interrupting the players that were kind of settled. Do you not think that's fair?
No, I think that's completely fair. And what I hate is that listening to that list, you got Mertesacker, who he didn't really get his flowers until after he kind of retired, or really towards the end. We said, he has no pace. And I think he was a really good defender. And then I look at Koscielny, who kind of soured his reputation a little bit as well. And Paulista, who went on to Valencia, who people say we should have kept because he was doing good things. So, he was loyal to the players that he had at the time. And just even hearing those players, it kind of makes me sad, Tom, man. It really kind of makes me a bit upset. But Callum Chambers, I think, was, unfortunately, he didn't live up to what he was supposed to do. And I think £18 million, would that even have got you a world-class player at the time?
I think it would have got you a better player that would have gone into, say, alongside one of those two. I mean, Per Mertesacker cost us less than £10 million, I think it was at the time that we signed him. Laurent Koscielny is a very similar one as well, and they were hedging their bets on these players. Koscielny especially, who came in from obviously Ligue 2 side. But was it Lorient at the time?
Yeah, it was.
And so I think when you look at what we could have done, I think we may have skipped the boat. This was obviously a period where fees were high, but they weren't as high as the 80, 90 millions that we see these days. Like 40 million quid for Ozil was seen as a massive signing. So around 20 million pounds for a defender, I feel that you could have, say, got a good starting centre-back that could have changed. I mean, we got Gabriel for 22 million around now, between 25 to 30, obviously with add-ons and stuff, but that's 6 years later. So to think that we could have got someone that could have come in and started for a similar fee, I think then would have made a huge difference. And that then bleeds into the following summer, which is arguably one of the most regrettable summer transfer windows ever, when we only signed Petr Cech during that year, and then Leicester went on to win the league. So that Arsenal's recruitment phase was just clearly a case of, and Arsene Wenger, I don't know if you've read his book or listened to his book, but he talks about it in there about how he kind of looked at money as his own and was reluctant to spend it, and kind of really went back and forth within his own mind about so many transfers. And that ultimately cost us during that period. Do you not think?
Yeah, yes, and that is the worst part. If we had just spent, and I can feel myself getting hot, and I'm a bit of, I'm fuming because we could have gone on to win the league that season. We really genuinely could have done it. It's not as if we're being far-fetched. We're not being naive in thinking that. Had Arsenal recruited properly, we really could have won the league because everyone was poor. I mean, Leicester, we could have been like them. We could have taken advantage of a bad situation, and yet here we are talking about Petr Cech, who was the beginning of us buying Chelsea cast-offs. And making that a transfer policy seemingly, and people were calling him an agent, saying that he was there to double cross us, and it is a bit annoying and it's frustrating because you could see that Arsene Wenger didn't really want to spend money. You could see that he saw it as his own, and that's when people started to say he had too much control, too much influence, and sometimes decisions should have been taken above his head. That's when I first learned that I think Wenger even has an economics degree, and it made me think, okay, so is he trying to apply too much logic? Is he overthinking these signings? And there was just a whole range of factors that came into it that made Arsenal look like we didn't know what we were doing in a changing landscape and a changing transfer market. And I think had we just bitten the bullet and started to go with the times a little bit sooner, we really wouldn't be where we are today.
If we then skip ahead to 16-17, that's the year that we spent nearly 80 million pounds on Mustafi and Granit Xhaka. Now, Mustafi, and at the time, I think people can scroll back to TGT 2016, where I was on the show and talking about Mustafi. And Mustafi in La Liga win challenges in the air. He looked like he was an okay defender. I mean, you listen him with praise at all. You look at obviously him winning the World Cup, playing not in centre back. He was playing, I believe, for quite a lot of it at right back.
Yep.
So, or even left back at times. But it was just a case of we spent a lot of money because we knew, and Wenger knew, we needed a centre back. Like we were so desperate to sign a centre back into the team. Looking at who we sold that year. We sold barely anyone. Serge Gnabry, that's the year that we sold him. I mean, that's unbelievable when you look back on it now. Jack Wilshere went on loan to Bournemouth. We also signed Lucas Perez that summer for £18 million. And again, the thing about that signing is, I talked about that signing as I thought it was quite good at the time because he was doing really well for Deportivo, but we never played him. We never ever played him. So what are your thoughts around that summer specifically?
I think for anyone that doesn't know, I still think that Granit Xhaka has a place in the Arsenal team. Whether that's in the starting 11, I don't know. Whether that's as a squad player, I don't know. But I think he has a place. And I look at the way he's been treated, and I can think back to that time. People say, "Oh, you could have got Kante for 30 million," and people still make that comparison. And we've come to see they are not the same player. And I think I still hear people say that now. And I just want to reiterate: Xhaka and Kante are not the same player. Yes, it would have been fantastic if we had got Kante, but we didn't. And Xhaka, as I say, I believe he still has a place in the team, but we've just used him horribly. We've used him really, really badly. As for Mustafi, nothing can be said about that. That was a mistake, a big mistake, and now we just have to make the most of a bad situation. He is a defender that is prone to mistakes because he lacks concentration. I don't think he's as technically gifted as he should be in an age of defending or football where centre backs need to be. And I think he looks even worse when he's paired with David Luiz, who suffers from some of the problems that he does as well. So yeah, Xhaka, I still think, as I say, has a place. Mustafi, have to cut our losses. And when I look back on that chapter in Arsenal's recent transfer history, it doesn't fill me with joy at all because it is a stick that people constantly use to.
Now, this is the point in Arsenal's recruitment where I want to hit you with the facts about how much Arsenal have spent, and also around a lot of that time the criticism of a lot of fans towards the club about not spending money. Because I think, in my mind, it's a complete myth that Arsenal don't spend and haven't spent over the course of, say, the last 7 years. I completely do. I'm not saying is I don't think Arsenal have spent well. That is the biggest problem, is that the way in which we spend money is always a problem and has been a problem up until we're going to get to it, but up until kind of more recently. And so if we look at like those seasons, in 13... we spent £42 million on Mesut Ozil. In 14-15, we spent £100 million on Alexis Sanchez, Callum Chambers, Danny Welbeck, Gabriel, Mathieu Debuchy, David Ospina and Christian Bielik. The season after is the one we mentioned about Petr Cech, but we still spent £25 million on Petr Cech, and then in January, Mohamed El Neni was brought in. You look at the season after that, which is what we just talked about, £101 million was spent on Granit Xhaka, Mustafi, Lucas Perez, Takuma Asano and Rob Holding, and Cohen Bramall as well. And then we go to the season that I'm going to talk about now, which is one of the worst summers I look at, because we spent £137 million. Now, 57 million of that, I should say, is on Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, which you look at as a very good signing.
Yeah.
But £47 million of that was on Alexandre Lacazette. We sold Alexis Sanchez for £30 million to Man United, and then spent that £30 million in a direct swap with the club on Henrik Mkhitaryan, which we now look, when we could have sold Alexis Sanchez the summer previously for a hell of a lot of money to Manchester City. Yes, it would have hurt, but if we look at what's happened to Alexis Sanchez, and I know the benefit of hindsight is a wonderful thing, but he wasn't really interested in playing for Arsenal anymore. His contract was rolling down to a single year being left on it, and we could have moved him on to Man City, a club that were way above us, if we're honest. And Man United, we then sold them to, are a club that were much, much closer to ourselves in terms of competitiveness. And arguably made that situation worse for ourselves. So we then got a Henrik Mkhitaryan who had not proven himself in the Premier League at Manchester United, and ultimately never did, and is now ironically gone off to Roma and is smashing it a bit, it's fair to say. That same summer, a lot of people talk about that summer is the one that obviously we then made a lot of money, because we sold Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain for 34 million, we sold Alexis Sanchez for 30 million, we sold Theo Walcott for 20 million, Olivier Giroud left for Chelsea in January for 15 million, Francis Coquelin left for 12 million, Szczesny left for 12 million quid, which is hilarious. Gabriel left for 10 million to Valencia. West Brom bought Kieran Gibbs for, according to this, 6.5. But there was a massive hilarity story about how much we'd rejected a bigger bid and then accepted a lower bid later on, if you remember that, which is hilarious. You should look into it. It's quite funny. So, yeah, crazy. So we made all of that money back that we spent in that summer. But the issue is the way that we spent the money. Yeah. And if we're being very honest, Aubameyang was brought in as, we were touted as a replacement for Alexis Sanchez, but really it's because Alexandre Lacazette had not had the desired effect at the club necessary to give us the goals. So we bought another striker and then played him on the wing, or we alternated them, which then persisted into Unai Emery's era. So that summer, where a lot of people say that we barely spent anything because we made a lot of money back, it's the way we spent the money, isn't it, that was the big issue? Yeah,
it is. It is, because a lot of people, as you say, were talking about us having two strikers. But the thing is, though, people were saying that we had two world-class strikers at the time. Now, I don't know if that's just us as fans being ignorant and not really watching Lacazette and knowing what he's about. But there was a lot of talk about us being back on the big time because we had two genuinely world-class strikers. And if you go back to old adages that Sir Alex Ferguson says, he'll say that you need four strikers in your squad to win a league. And we were halfway there. So then does that mean we were going to get back into the top four at the very least? But as you say, to have Mkhitaryan in your team, I love football fans so much. We're so like we just love it, because I can recall people saying that, oh, Mkhitaryan and Aubameyang, they're going to link up like they did before and help us, get back to where we were. And I think in their first game, I think Mkhitaryan assisted for Aubameyang, And we were like, oh, well, there you go. That's all the evidence that we need. Yeah, I think, I love Arsenal fans. I love football fans in general. But yeah, we haven't spent our money properly. And just going back through all of this, it just lets me see that Arsenal have been behind for a very, very, very long time. We've been making the same mistakes repeatedly, and it keeps putting us back. And I just wonder, have we learned? Will Edu put things right? Are we finally going to be able to do things properly? I don't know. I don't know if we will.
Yeah, and I think Christopher Fung highlights the fact that we spent a lot of money on positions where we had such bigger pressing issues. That is something else that whilst Arsenal spent badly on specific players, and we referenced Mustafi and Xhaka as a big part of that, but also the fact that we spent it on positions where ultimately Arsenal had always been a really good attacking side, and we always were scoring goals. And if we're honest, whilst Aubameyang scored a lot of goals for us, other areas of the pitch then didn't score as many because the goals were being so concentrated into Aubameyang's area, and we still conceded the same amount of goals. Like, you can keep adding really top-class players to your front line, but there's only so many goals that you can score in a game. It's just the law of averages at the end of the day that it will balance out across a season. And the biggest thing to change ultimately to win titles and progress is to improve the backline. And that's just something that we didn't do. I mean, you move into the next season, 18-19. This is, of course, Unai Emery's first summer as manager, where this is kind of the summer in which Arsene Wenger and the coach in general didn't have too much to do with recruitment. Because it was done by Raul Sanllehi, it was done by Sven Mislintat, it was done by... it was basically those two, if we're being honest. It was those two that were doing most of it. Lucas Torreira came in for 25 million quid, which at the time we looked at as looks like a great signing. This looks like someone who's going to transform a position where we've desperately needed a defensive-minded midfielder. We'll get onto the why that didn't work in a second. Bert Leno came in for 22 million quid, which is also a better sign, I thought, and was a good signing as a goalkeeper. Socrates, that was a weird one. Socrates was like a little bit of the sword that Sven Mislintat fell on, in that we thought he was going to spot these great players, and it became very quickly, I became very aware to the fact that we were signing just ex-Dortmund players or Dortmund players in Aubameyang, Mkhitaryan and Socrates. Yes, he found Mavropanos, and yes, I think that he had a hand in finding Matteo Guendouzi as well, but he did kind of fall onto what he knew, and Socrates just didn't really change us in any way. It didn't improve us. It didn't. It wasn't a transformative centre-back signing. Yeah. And we look at saying we lost the quote-unquote diamond eyes of football in Sven going, but if we're looking back on his time at the club, I don't think he necessarily had a huge impact on our fortunes. Do you not think?
I completely agree. Although I do think that Socrates gets a lot of stick, and I've never quite understood.
Of course.
Is it because he didn't have that transformative presence? Or
I think he's not an improvement on what we have, and I think the same goes for Granit Xhaka. And I defend Granit Xhaka a lot on this show, but I'm very much of the mind that 40 million quid for someone that has not progressed our midfield game and has not improved us in the midfield isn't ultimately, and that's where I have sympathy for a lot of people to do. I think that the frustration people have then leads into very abusive insults towards these players ultimately, which I'm not on board of. And I do think also that you get a hyperbolic nature of exaggerating the criticism of some of these players when it's not really the case. Xhaka has been decent for us, but he's not been what Thomas Partey, for instance, looks to be for us in midfield, which I think is the difference.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you're right. At one point, you began to see that Sven was just going back to his old club saying, "What about this guy? What about this guy? Can I have this one?" And that doesn't really sound like a genius recruiter. It doesn't sound like someone who knows exactly what they're doing and wrings the very last bit out of a transfer market and bends it to his will. I could go back to my old employers and say, "Yeah, give me your best guy. Oh, you don't need this guy anymore. Yeah, I'll take him too." And it seemed as though that's what he was doing. Aubameyang, like I say, is a fantastic signing. Socrates, for me, I think you're right in saying he wasn't transformative, but I can't recall him having a clanger. Maybe one.
Liverpool away.
Two then, because there was one.
Yeah.
There was a Europa League. I think it might have been quarter-final game where I think he either got sent off
against Atletico or no AC Milan or
I think was it that many?
He gets sent off. I don't remember him getting sent off at all.
There was something stupid that he did, and I thought, yeah, this might be a turning point for you. But yeah, you're right. He wasn't transformative, so I'm not going to defend him too much. But Sven going, you're right. I think the fact that he went so soon has probably given people license to say, oh, he was going to change us, man. Why didn't we keep him?
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at his actual track record, it wasn't great.
Let me flip the devil's advocate side of things, because Jonathan Porter in the chat box says, I wonder if Sven Mislintat would have done better if Raul hadn't have had the overarching and kind of dictatorship effect, which kind of blocked maybe what he wanted to do and ultimately led to him leaving. So am I wrong in the sense that I've said there that I don't think Sven Mislintat had too much of an impact, but actually, am I looking at it from the wrong perspective? Am I thinking that he just signed his old players when actually we should be looking at maybe Raul as the guy that ultimately also left and was decided by the club that he was expendable when we had Edu there, we had Vinay there, and ultimately we got rid of the guy that was coming in from Barcelona and was going to connect us with all these agents, and we got rid of him. So are we looking at it wrong? Are we looking at it from that perspective when actually Raul may have blocked Sven's good work? Quite
possibly. I don't even think... in terms of footballing men, however people like to put it, I think I would probably trust Sven more than I do Raul. But I think I would give Sven a second chance, put it that way. If I was Edu, if I was Arteta, I'd be willing to give him another go. But obviously, I think they've got a new streamlined system, streamlined process, and I don't see it happening. But yeah, we probably are looking at it. We could look at it more objectively than we do currently.
In that January, we also signed Denis Suarez, if you remember, on loan. We were linked to Ivan Perisic for quite a while, and then ended up with Denis Suarez, who played about 3 games. Who came on as a sub and didn't do anything. That was a classic. That was a classic Arsenal signing. And now we move on to more recent times, and we look back at the summer of 2019-20, when Arsenal spent more than they ever have done in a transfer window, where they spent nearly £150 million in a window. Yeah. Now, £72 million of that was on Nicola Pepe, which and this is kind of where it gets onto the conversation about how Arsenal have looked at players that they've thought, yeah, let's go get that guy because he's tearing it up where he is, and maybe not considering the context of the situation that he's at. First off, just want to say, Sam Trester, thank you for signing up as a member. Welcome to the gang. If you are, in fact, a TGT Expert member, you can join our Discord server, so make sure you do that. And enjoy the exclusive content. There was a piece of exclusive content that went out the other day talking about... I can't remember now. It was talking about... Soboslai, of course it was. So talking about him. So where was I? Talking about Pepe coming in. The context around some of our signings is that on the surface, like Pepe, who was tearing it up at Lille, it looks great on the surface. But then when you look at the fact that Lille in Liga were a very counter-attacking base side, and that Pepe was doing exceptionally well, scoring goals like he did for us against Sheffield United this season, but that's not really something he's been able to do on a consistent basis because Arsenal are very much more a possession-based side in the Premier League. I don't know if it's just me, Adam, but I don't feel like Pepe has been able to take on players very well. What do you think about that?
I think you are absolutely correct. I think that is the main aspect of his game, the only thing that you could sort of attribute to him and characterize him as, but we just haven't been able to do it. And what hurts is that it's really predictable. You can see, you know what he's going to do. And I don't know if it's that he's not the right player profile, because you kind of compare it to Iron Robin, and that's what people keep doing. You say, well, you knew what Iron Robin was going to do, but no one could stop him. And you think, okay, well, that's the case, but so why can't Pepe do that? So, yeah, I think it's that he's come up in a system, in a league, that suited counter-attacking, and where he had far more space and he could do what he wanted. He didn't have to think as much about his game. And the Premier League and Arsenal is just not like that. So it's either he learns to adapt or we learn to adapt. And I don't know which one it's going to be right now. Arteta says that there's non-negotiables, so it seems like it's going to have to be Pepper that learns. And if he doesn't, then it's going to be really long for him. And I worry for the guy, because I do really believe that his Arsenal time could be done already.
Now, we also in that summer signed David Luiz from Chelsea. See your face drop. Again, another centre-back signing, akin to Socrates, a senior player, a centre-back. We needed a centre-back. If you remember, we were linked to Diop and Meccano for most of that window, and it looked that maybe it could happen, and then we ended up with Luiz. And it kind of bleeds into the Pepe transfer that, yes, Unai Emery wanted a wide player. He wanted someone that was going to score goals in that final third. But it just seemed that Arsenal had a more pressing issue in the centre-back area that they could have put a lot more money on. Having seen the impact of Virgil van Dijk as well already, that we could have seen Arsenal spend the money on Pepe on a centre-back and instead spend maybe a little less on a player. And that was the summer as well. We were linked with Ryan Fraser, which I know that in the benefit of hindsight, he doesn't look like he's done too much at Bournemouth and Newcastle since. But he was available very cheap and could have just tied us over in that area until the following summer, or we could have really gone hell for leather on a forward player the next summer. So what do you think in that regard?
I have nothing to say about David. Honestly, that is one of the worst signings we've ever made. It literally solidified and confirmed our status as a laughingstock, because I don't know how we've gone from signing or from having centre backs like Tony Adams and all that type of players to going to a guy who gets nutmegged in Champions League games, who commentators describe as being controlled by a kid on a PlayStation, who we know can only defend in a three at the back system, and sort of goes against everything that Arsenal have ever done. Honestly, the David Luiz signing for me was the straw that broke the camel's back. There's rarely many signings that I can't look at as a positive, but that's one that I just can't look at and see anything, because honestly, it is a joke. It is a joke. David Luiz, he shouldn't even be a centre-back. He's a defensive midfielder, if you really want to even call him that. And I think it's a real shame that we signed that guy, man, honestly.
Now, again, I think that people, if you've just tuned in and you've heard Adam talk about David Luiz in such a way, I think that ultimately one of the things, and if we bring back that word context, is that Arsenal have needed a top-class centre-back for so long, and we got David Luiz. Now, David Luiz, as we have seen in the FA Cup, has put on some fantastic performances for Arsenal. But we needed someone that we needed to be consistently good all the time and not make the classic Arsenal errors like get red cards or give penalties away, which he has done on quite a consistent basis. So it was more around the fact that Arsenal could have spent a lot more money on a centre-back rather than us just saying that Luiz is a terrible, terrible centre-back. That's not what we're saying. We're saying more around the context that we could have signed a better centre-back and we just didn't. Now, thankfully, and what I want Arsenal fans to take away from what has been 30 minutes of really basing us slagging off Arsenal's recruitment setup is more look at what's happening more recently. Edu has come in, of course. And I know that Edu oversaw the Pepe situation, but as we know, wasn't too involved in that. That was more Raul Sanyehi and Jorge Mendes, who was more of an intermediary in the deal as well. But Edu has come in and we have started to see some better signs from some of our transfers. We needed a left back and we went out and signed Kieran Tierney, who I think we can agree has been a transformative left back figure for Arsenal. No problem at all. We also began to invest in youth. The first of those, which I know will draw a line in the sand for some people, but William Saliba obviously came in for 28 million quid from Santetti and we sent him back immediately on loan. Now, that's the first time that Arsenal have really gone out and bought a young guy for a significant fee of, say, over 20 million quid that's under 20s. Chambers, as we go back right the way to the start of the video, was kind of that there as well, but never really became of anything, and that was when fees were slightly different. But Saliba's come in, not focusing necessarily on what's happened with him since, and we're still waiting to kind of see the impact of him at the club. We also spent £6 million on Gabriel Martinelli, who looks an amazing talent and someone that can really change things. We then move into January. Now, I want to talk about January briefly, because I think there was a lingering bit of negativity around the club, and it also kind of bleeds into this summer with the Willian signing. We signed Cedric from Southampton, which was just really silly. I just can't really sum it up in any other way, because Arsenal, if you look at Arsenal's squad, we have Bellerin, who's had his injury issues, but we have Mainsley, who has done very well at times at right back, in my mind. Are you laughing at Mainsley?
I think it's so funny that you call him Mainsley, but I love it. I love it.
Always. And then we've got, if you look at the youth ranks, we've got a young guy called Jordan Osei-Tutu, who went on loan to Bochum in Germany and did very well, and he's doing quite good for Cardiff as well since moving there this season on loan. There was, in my mind, enough that Arsenal didn't have to panic and spend and get, well, not even spend, we got him basically for free on loan, but it's someone that we put onto a 5-year contract on a decent wage, who Southampton fans couldn't believe that we'd gone out and got from them. And then Pablo Mari. Now, Pablo Mari, I don't think we can have too much of an analysis on, because we genuinely haven't seen what he is capable of because of the injuries, issues that he's had, and stuff like that. So I'm going to park Pablo Mari for a second, because we can't, for the whole show basically, because we can't really analyse it. But for me, the Cedric signing and going into the Willian signing of this summer, do you think these are more of a hangover of, say, the Raul period, or do you, and maybe the Kia Jarabchin kind of influence on the club as well, or do you think, look at those as kind of mainstays, and you think these are always going to be signs that Arsenal are going to continue to make and continue to make errors, or do you think these are things that maybe we will start to finish seeing now?
I think if Arteta is the man and manager that I believe him to be, I think this will be the last of those kinds of signings. If Arteta is something I don't know yet, and that's very possible because he is a new manager, he hasn't, solidified his ideas and all that type of thing, then we may well, because the agent influence is very prevalent in football now, and they have to do their job. They have to get the best possible deal for their clients, and I understand that. I do the same thing. But you would hope that with Arteta not just being a head coach, but being a manager, would be able to think about what's good for the club and wouldn't just have short-term thinking, wouldn't just try to think about the next game or fight fires, but would really think about the systemic issues, the chronic issues that Arsenal as a team and Arsenal as a football club face, and try to right those wrongs. And as I say, if Arteta really wants the best for the club and is the principled man that I hope and believe him to be, Cedric, Willian, Cech, David Luiz, they won't happen anymore. And I pray that is the case.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately we are going to see some dodgy ones always. Like, no club escapes bringing in a couple of dodgy players that just don't work. Some do. Luckily, you look at Man City, they've not really signed a player that you'd go, well, that was a bad signing. So they've done pretty darn well in the market, but they've had to spend a lot of money to do so.
Yeah.
Arsenal have always kind of had these Willian, Cedric, Kolasinac, Lichtsteiner type signings within them. David Luiz I kind of put there as well. And it's not really worked out. I'm hoping that kind of changes. And if we look at the signings of Kieran Tierney, of Gabriel Martinelli, of hopefully William Saliba as well in the future, and then you combine that with our business, which takes us to our most recent summer, where of course we signed Thomas Partey for £45 million, and we signed Gabriel from Lille for 23, rising up to possibly near £30 million. And Arsenal finally signed that centre midfielder that they've desperately needed for a long time. They finally signed a centre-back that looks to be the real deal and was being courted by so many top clubs across Europe at the same time. A lot of those clubs, like United, like to deny that fact, but I have it on very good authority that they were very interested.
Why do they do that?
I don't know. It's just a classic United thing. It's just what they do. So you now look at that, and it's nice to end the show on kind of a positive. You also look at the fact that Arsenal were very clearly interested in Houssem Aouar as well and trying to bring him into the team. We're also very much linked to Szoboszlai as well, and probably going to be linked to these two players throughout the next January and summer window too. Are you hopeful that the signs that you've seen over the last 2 years from some of the good that we did in 2019 and some of the really good stuff we've seen in 2020, that this is kind of an upward trajectory, that Arsenal will start to cement their place as a better recruiter of players with Edu and Arteta as kind of that recruitment group?
Yeah, no, I do really, really think so, because Partey, to I guess go back to the Ozil and Sanchez deal, that it felt like a watershed moment. As you say, a lot of other clubs were in for him. This is a player who is not coming to the end of his career, but is at his peak. And we've seen put in dominant performances in the very highest games and the most elite games. And for Arsenal to get that type of player felt big. It felt special. So yeah, I think I would hope, as I say again, that we can continue to do that. Gabriel as well, who I think is a dark horse for signing of the season so far, I think has been excellent. Very solid, very reliable. He's been fantastic. And I think if we do manage to get Szoboszlai, is that how I pronounce his name?
Szoboszlai, yeah.
Szoboszlai, love that. Hopefully we will have done our due diligence on him too, and he will then be able to be one of these players that we talk about. And he's only got a 25 million release clause as well, which if we can get him anyway. So yeah, I really hope that we continue to do the good things that we've done, and that Arteta and Edu really work together, get their asses in gear, and make sure that Arsenal get back to where we know they can be.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that the signs are looking positive. I ultimately think that also Arteta has not really been given a chance to unleash his offensive side of his game, because he hasn't, in his tenure, signed an attacking player yet. We're still waiting for him to sign. He's not signed a single one. Like, you look at Gabriel, Partey, Marie, Cedric, and that's it. So,
did we not count Willian?
Oh yeah, I suppose you can count Willian. Yeah. I forget. I try to forget about Willian, to be honest. Okay. But I mean, like, spent money. He was a free signing, but he's not been able to put investment into an attacking player yet. And I feel that when they get to kind of sound out a player that they like, they negotiate a fee. Whereas Willian was kind of just available in there, and at the time, it looked too good to pass up for a free transfer. It's looking very different now, but that's always with the benefit of hindsight. So I hope that what you kind of take away, guys, from this video is that we've kind of gone through how Arsenal's recruitment has been so incredibly poor in the past, and actually showing to you that Arsenal have indeed spent a lot of money, kind of debunking the myth that Arsenal don't really spend, and that arguably we look towards the ownership, who only recently, that's something that we haven't actually touched on at all, and I suppose it's something that we should mention before we wrap up, is that KSE and the ownership invested in the Pepe deal. They put their own money into sanctioning that deal to happen, and more recently they invested and gave the green light for Edu to go and buy Thomas Partey with investment as well. So I think that, in combination with the knowledge that they had always said that they would invest once they had full 100% control of the club, which they now do, which I know is nostalgically and kind of ethically, when you look at a lot of the ex-fans who had shares, I feel their pain. I genuinely do. But it's not going to change. It's not going to change and go back to the way it was. So we've got to try and look and move on from that. And the positive from it is that it looks to be that there is investment going to be spent in the team, and that ultimately, in combination with an improvement in the way that we are starting to recruit players, I think gives us really good hope for the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Adam, do you want to tell people where they can find you and what you're going to be up to in the next couple of weeks, Arsenal-wise?
Yeah. At TFO Show, the Fifth Official on YouTube, and at TFO Show on Twitter. And Arsenal related, we've got another Arsenal podcast coming up next week, either Monday or Wednesday. And you never know, Tom might be a part of it if we can manage to sort our scheduling out. But yeah, no, that's just that. Always giving a review of any game and just talking crap about football as I always do.
Nice. Good stuff. Oh, I hope people you've enjoyed the show. If you have, please drop a like. This is a brand new feature on it that each week, I might do it every Tuesday. It might make sense to make it a scheduled thing. Exactly. The shift finishes at 3, so show at 5. It sounds perfect. So let's talk Arsenal. Hopefully back with you with a guest every single week on a Tuesday at 5 o'clock UK time. So make sure you tune in for that. Set your reminders. Set it in your weekly calendars. I know that that's the thing that you'll be looking forward to most in lockdown anyway, of course. But it's been a pleasure to speak to you, as I'm sure it has for Adam too. And we'll see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.